And here we are with Nat Muller, a curator, art historian,
No.
critic,
Writer.
That's very humble. Who's just published, fresh off the press, this monograph on Walid Siti, Iraqi Kurd diaspora artist who spent significant time in Slovenia and is now part of the London arts economy. Who is this guy?
Walid is a wonderful artist, and as you said, an Iraqi Kurdish artist who has this amazing practice. And this book actually tries to introduce people to Walid's work over the span of 40 years.
Yeah.
And tries to hone in on certain themes that are prevalent in his practice, which go from landscape and architecture to belonging and exile and war and conflict. So I very much hope that Walid's work will be known to many more people. And it's been a real privilege for me to dive not only into his work, but also a little bit into his head and see how over the course of 40 years his practice has evolved and changed, but also to see how so many tropes and themes keep popping up in his work. And I hope that this book shows that to as wide a readership as possible.
Do you remember when you first saw his work and the impression it had on you?
I can't really remember, but I've been meeting Walid in the Middle East at biennials. We did a solo show together in 2017 in Berlin at Zilberman Gallery, which was really lovely because we showed new works, but I also had the pleasure of visiting Walid in his studio. And
In Hackney?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, if
London.
you've been to a studio, you see that it's this wonderful and rather messy place with all of the sketches. And you actually see, and I think that's quite interesting about Walid's work, how he has this visual building blocks to his practice. So we showed the sketches, we showed other work, and we published a catalog together. And I think there probably the seed of this book is planted as well.
And who are the other writers you've commissioned to write for as contributing texts?
So Venetia Porter, who's a curator at the British Museum, where Walid also has working collection, produced a text, and she takes us on a sort of biographical journey of Walid and how he studied.
Carry on.
And how he studied at the Institute of Fine Arts in Baghdad, and this was a very exciting period in the early 70s where there was also a momentum for Iraqi artists, and she's interviewed him, and he speaks also about some of his tutors. And then he studied in Slovenia as well, and he studied printmaking. And that was also a very influential time, up to the time that he moved to London. There's also Zainab Bahrani, who is an Iraqi professor of architecture and art at Columbia University. And I've asked her to contribute a text that looks more at the landscape and architecture aspects in Walid's work. It's a beautiful text. And then Sarah Johnson, who is a curator here at the Museum for World Cultures, but wrote her PhD on contemporary and modernist Iraqi art. And she looks more at the tropes of belonging and exile in Walid's work.
Oh. And have you found when he's moved to London that London has had this impact on him as a city?
I don't know. I think this is really a question to ask Walid. I think obviously in his work, every context will have influenced his practice. But what I think is really interesting in the book is that you still feel how much Kurdistan is part and parcel of his practice. There's always a reference to home and to being in exile, and even if he is in London, he is there and he isn't there somehow, so that sense of displacement and the many ladders that he has in his work, on the one hand I think they symbolize an escape and hope and getting out of certain contexts. But there's always the tragedy of war and conflict and exile in his work as well.
Thank you. That's such a great insight into the work of Walid Siti, which is published by
Kir.
And is part of many fantastic books that you've produced. And please get one for your university library and follow the work of Walid Siti, who's on your Instagram. And I'm a privileged owner of this book. So thank you so much. Thank you for your kindness.